Great. Okay, it's my pleasure to have all of you here with us today. For those of you who may not be ultra familiar with the China market, these three are really some very high-level leaders from China. Helen used to lead, was CSO at Baidu. Dr. Zhang used to be CEO. I'm sure Baidu you all know, right? A huge company from China. Dr. Zhang led Kingsoft, which is another very massive, one of the largest tech companies in China. He was a CEO, also a very active angel investor himself. And Cynthia here leads one of the largest mutual funds in China. So we have really an amazing panel with some deep perspective on the Chinese investment and startup environment. So first off, all of you have been here for this whole week on what we call our GASA education trip. So for all of those of you who don't know, they've been here this week meeting with really many of the top tech leaders in Silicon Valley this week. Them in a group of about 30 or so other tech leaders. So I'd like to ask all of you, what has impressed you, either this week or just in general, what most impresses you about Silicon Valley? What do you think is special here?
I think for me, the most impressive is about people, because I can see the sparkling eyes of people that they have passion, they have the desire to do something different and to really, no matter it's changing the world or they want to do something better. So it's really a group of passionate and very innovative people gathering together and wanting to improve people's life. I think that's the people here are most important and the most impressive, and they are free of doing anything. That's what they have no restriction and they are not afraid of failure. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, to me, I have been consistently being impressed by the level of energy that I see from either the university's students or professors or entrepreneurs, and also the density of brain power here, and that to some extent is something we see lacking in some of the startups back in China. What I really am referring to is the technology innovation, the depths of technology people are working on, and in particular in the AI area, in the autonomous driving, in the robotics. So this is what I'm most impressed by.
I think for me, this trip, what made this trip different from my other trips, because my previous job at Baidu, I'm very aware of the technology innovation here. So because of Baidu, recruit a lot of engineers here, and we also look at a lot of startup technology companies. But what impressed me most this trip is we meet scientists in different scientific fields. In the basic science field, like physics, chemistry, biology, and what impressed me is not only technology innovation, but their innovation in those what I call fundamental science area, and the effort about cross scientific areas in combination of chemistry, physics, chemistry, biology, what you call the multidisciplinary effort. That's very impressive, and I think that's what China needs. I learned a lot from this trip. I'm talking to my son because he's a STEM student, so I'm trying to encourage him to go multidisciplinary from now. So.
Right on. And so earlier on, we had Josh Ellman from Greylock talking, and he did a lot. He praised the amazing startups that are actually coming out of China as well. What do you think China's comparative advantage is as a tech industry when you compare it to Silicon Valley? Obviously, we just praised Silicon Valley. What do you think China is actually doing better?
Okay, I invested into Meitu, Dianping, Meituan, Didi, and all these very consumption-driven technology companies. So I think the biggest advantage for China and the China startups are the market, because we have 1.6 billion people, and also for the for a lot of areas, I think China's, especially business development and the technology development, are still behind of U.S. For example, the to-B business, there are a lot of areas. So for the staff, for the young people, if they have dream, it's really the sky is the limit. So compared to a lot of staff here, I see more dreams in China now because the market is huge and the competition in terms of traditional industry, the competition is not very intense, and there are a lot of things you can change in China versus here.
Yeah, I actually very much in agreement with Cynthia. One thing I want to add on is that, in particular, in the area of mobile internet, that's where we see more innovations and much fast pace in those innovations in China, and the penetration of mobile technology like mobile payment and other things are actually more advanced than here to some extent. So this is something I hope that the startups, the entrepreneurs here should pay more attention and maybe learn from them. Yeah.
I think what makes China different from the US is one thing I think China is doing better is the adoption of technology. And the reason is because it's just sheer size of the market. You have over 750 million mobile users. And the other thing is, it's very typical in China, that any business model you can think of, you will have 10, 20, 30, 100 competitors out there. It's cut through competitive in that market. So the good thing is because it's so cut through competitive, therefore everybody has to try harder. And so the adoption rate is very fast compared to US. So I remember one trip I made to Israel, I met this company, very good technology. So the founder was very excited that his user now reaching 100,000. He's very excited because he thinks that's a great milestone. And I'm like, well, you know what? In China, if you don't start with 10 million, you're not even on radar screen. And that's how competitive the market is. So I think that makes China good in a way. I met this very interesting company this morning. He's this girl working in a startup company here in US. It's like 5 minutes walking from here, working on the sensory technology. And the company is adopting a very interesting strategy. They're going to try this thing out in China and then bring it back to US. I think that's smart.
Right on. In the past year, we've seen a couple Chinese companies, specifically Musical.ly and Meitu, actually develop a pretty strong user base here in Silicon Valley and in the US. Historically, we have seen relatively few, especially socially oriented services be successful, from China be successful, especially here in the US. But we've seen Meitu and Musical.ly. Do you think this is a trend that will continue of Chinese companies successfully getting into the US market? Or do we have two companies that are, maybe two exceptional companies, and this won't necessarily be the beginning of a trend?
I think it's definitely a trend. The reason why is, number one, China market is so competitive. So when all these companies, when Meitu came, I'm the major investor in Meitu. When I invested into Meitu, they only have less than 100 million international users. Only within 1.5 years, their international users are 4 times more. So now they have 500 million international users. Why is growing much faster than China? Because China is so competitive that all these teams, when they compete in China, they already, I would say, they are very competitive. And then secondly, they are very hungry for success because they are very young and they just want to succeed. And for Chinese company, very few Chinese company are internationally achieve success. We only see Huawei, Tencent not yet, maybe Alibaba, yes. So all these a lot of entrepreneurs in China, when they achieve some success in China, they want to went overseas. That's just like a U.S. company, multinational U.S. company back in 80s or 90s, I would say. So I think there are 4 years ago, I see a lot of Chinese companies are thinking, how shall we go overseas? So they are still in a decision process. Nowadays, it's for sure we are going international. It's just how much money shall we invest, and how can we grow internationally more successfully. So I would say maybe within 2 or 3 years, you may see more companies coming out, because a lot of them, they are now expanding internationally.
Yeah, I just like to add on. If you look back in the last couple of years, there are quite a few very successful companies that has achieved quite some achievement here in the U.S., including one of the subsidiaries that was part of Kingsoft. Now is an independent company listed in New York Stock Exchange. It's Qian Mobile. It's actually its success started with overseas marketing, including the U.S. So actually more than half of the profit come from U.S. market. And another thing that added on this success is actually companies like Facebook, Google, and other big companies actually their platform helped the Chinese companies to get into China. For instance, Qian Mobile, the entire advertising revenue actually come indirectly from Facebook platform. Facebook brings advertising revenue to our traffic. So those internet platform definitely help Chinese companies. And the last one, but not least important, is the younger generation of entrepreneurs in China. They compared to our generation, they started with international, very much international way of thinking. And so when they think about their future success, they're not only thinking about China, they think about overseas, think about Southeast China, India, Indonesia, two countries with a huge population. And then when they think about the developer world, they think about U.S. Again, this is a huge market. And but then the users are somehow in common. If you look at it musically, their users are teenagers, high school kids, and those kids are not necessarily much different from high school kids in China. So I think that's another reason why those companies are successful.
I think obviously, as Dr. Hongjiang mentioned, there are some very successful companies coming to overseas. The one is Qian Mobile. If you look at why Qian Mobile is so successful, it's because they bring mobile application tools, which has very little to do with cultural differences. So if you look at how Chinese market is going to expand international market, I think there are two approaches. Going to developing world, they can just applying the business model that has been already tested successful in China. I'll give you an example. There's a very successful mobile company doing information recommendation in China called Toutiao. And immediately, that success, the venture partner, venture capitalists backing those companies in China, they invested two of the leading, very similar business model in Indonesia. And those two companies are also very successful. So one way is to applying success stories into developing companies. For developed world, I think China has to start with things that's less culture sensitive to begin with, and then gradually adopt to the market. It's going to be a trial and error. It's not easy. I think just like the experience of U.S. company into China is a very mixed result because it's just not easy. I think China is going to go through a similar process.
Mm-hmm. Kind of building on this question.
Let me add on one thing. If you in particular, Helen mentioned Toutiao. the Tabbots, the news distribution platform. Actually, if you look at some new features from Facebook and from Snapchat, they are actually copying from Total, coming very clearly coming from Total. So for those startups here and even some successful ones with large scale, I would really much encourage you guys looking at those leading mobile internet startups in China, and either they already have footage here in the U.S. or they haven't been here yet. You look at their product, their apps, and see if there are features that you can borrow to the market here. So I think a CFC and copy from China now, you should really think about that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that's great advice for Silicon Valley and I think a lot of the smart people are already doing this. I mean, we see Facebook. I mean, Facebook Messenger is clearly watching WeChat very, very closely, right? So that's absolutely true. I think China is now an industry that we should be tracking, not only even if you're not interested in taking your business there, but because you want to be more competitive here and have the best ideas. So I absolutely agree with that. Similar to the last question, I want to kind of move up to the large tech companies. And in the U.S., we have Google, Facebook, Amazon as like three of the biggest internet players. In China, we interestingly enough have three companies in the exact same spaces: Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, right? That dominate the spaces. So we both have three large companies that are growing more and more dominant. But interestingly enough, at least right now, they compete directly very little. You could say they have some indirect competition. They have some proxy wars in India, that maybe through investments, but rarely are they competing head-to-head, product-to-product in the same marketplace. Do you foresee this changing in the near future, whereas Alibaba and these Tencent, Baidu get more aggressive internationally? The microphone's coming to Helen since she has the inside knowledge from Baidu here. So do you see this playing out? How do you see this playing out over the following years as they both become more and more dominant?
I think there's a reason why the BATs of the world, of the GAFA of the US, so far have not competed directly head-to-head. And the reason is China is just simply too big. And the BATs of China have to figure out how to win their domestic market first, and it's still very competitive. We were constantly living on the edge. The founder and CEO of Baidu, you always say that can die anytime. So that's the reason. That's I think. I think, but going forward, if you want me to put a guess, I would think that there will be competition, especially in the area of cloud service and artificial intelligence, because that's a global area of competition. I think given industries all looking for cloud service, given everybody is now thinking about AI, there will be head-to-head competition. Take an example of autonomous driving, right? I think Google, Apple, Baidu have all put a lot of effort in autonomous driving, and that's not just Google for US, Baidu for China. No, we're all looking at the international market. If you look at Alibaba, I don't think their cloud service is only serving China. I don't think that's their vision. They clearly have already taken payment out of China, right? So in terms of their payment capability, I think you can find no one near the scale of Alibaba and Tencent globally now. Tencent obviously is not just interested in doing entertainment-related business in China. They're very aggressive, acquiring assets all over the place, entertainment asset. So this company, they're thinking big. So it will be interesting. I think it will be interesting. I always think this is a good competition because it motivates everybody.
Right. Anything else to add? Okay, that's Cynthia.
I think the competition will not be very intense in the short period. The reason why is because both BATs, they are still expanding into various traditional industries in China. So there's still a lot of space to grow in China. Although they are investing overseas, but I don't see they do a lot of control acquisition. It's more like they want to, share the growth of some areas internationally. So I consider, in near term, but as Helen mentioned, if we look at 5 years down the road, if with all the AIs, the whole world is more connected together, then it's all more about data and more about the connection. I can see the technology competition. Then I say the competition will become more fierce. Yeah. Right. There's still too much to grow in China because the whole traditional industry are still not very up to date in terms of technology adoption.
So it sounds like we should be expecting more competition, but maybe not too intense in the short term because China is still a large market that even the BATs haven't fully captured in some cases. But definitely maybe in the midterm, we're going to see more and more of this. I have one last question for me, and we might have time for a question from the audience. I'm not sure. It depends on when our scores are completed. My last question is, for many entrepreneurs here, they all are very enticed by by China as a market. Definitely would be interested to go to expand their businesses there. However, they're very practical. They've seen many international, especially Silicon Valley companies, really struggle in China. What is your advice for, especially for entrepreneurs as they consider China? I mean, and be as specific as possible. If there maybe highlight some industries that they should consider, and some industries they absolutely should not consider, or maybe some tips for how to best get into the market in terms of partners. So, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs that are kind of in the early stages of considering China as an expansion market? Who would like to start us, Cynthia?
I think definitely it's the China market is really something you need to consider from day one, because from what I see just now, there are a lot of areas because I can see the China already have solution, already their teams are working on that. So China may already have better solution than US here. So if you have AI technology, I think the earlier you can consider China market is better because probably your opportunity is much bigger in China versus here. How we can do better? I think definitely you have to have a local partner, whether it's your investor or it's your distributor. But I think distributor is not really a great way of getting into the market because you really want someone who are very committed to help you to grow in China because the market is so competitive. So the better way I would consider is probably you it's a shareholder partnership. It's like a former China company whereby you share the shares. The other party, the other team who could leverage on your technology versus at the same time they have the whole incentive to help you to grow, and they're very committed to grow only in China. I think that's very important.
I worked both for multinational companies like Microsoft, HP before, and also for the past 6 years, been working for Chinese companies. And in the last year, I have looked into many small startups in the U.S. In China. So there is one thing that we have. If you want to be successful, just like many other companies, if you want to be successful, you better make sure your decision cycle is very short. Your company like Microsoft, anything happen in China will take 6 months for the headquarters to make a decision, and once you make a decision, since this market is changing again, so you constantly being too late, So if you look at those companies that are successful, in China, the more traditional U.S. companies than the internet companies. The reason simply is because the internet companies' decision cycle require to be much shorter than traditional companies. If you are a diaper producer, a decision cycle of 6 months, it's fine. But if you are an internet company, you basically have to make a decision within days instead of months. So that's one thing that definitely we should keep in mind. That's what will require a local team and local decision made for the local market. And another thing, if we learn from those successful internet companies in the U.S., I'm from China, like Qian Mobile, and you should leverage the big players in China. Instead of building your own marketing channel, buying your own, build up your own advertising platform. You can always using the BAT's, marketing platform and advertising platform. So, keep yourself agile and partner with Chinese players. And I think those are things we should pay more attention to.
Great.
I'll try to give a simple answer. There's a rule of thumb. Look at the end market. If your end market is unique to US, then don't come to China. It doesn't matter if your end market is enterprise, customer, or consumer. If that is US specific, don't come to China. If you're doing technology company, you have cutting edge technology solution, then that's something you can consider. I'll just use the example here today. There's a company called OmniLab. What they're doing is really cross-boundary. There's no China or US specific. You can offer that solution to a China company as well. So that can easily be taken to China. But and if you're offering to the end market, that end market is also not country specific, that's something you can consider about China, because China is a huge market. The company I met this morning is very typical. They're just end user, are not US specific. But there are also other things you should check. I'll give an example of the other candidate I saw today called Flume, which is offering water detection solutions. One thing you should check before you can consider China is you have to check house insurance. How many people are buying house insurance? And it's very underdeveloped in China for the time being. So don't get in China before that market is developed. So just some very simple business rules. I think that's all common knowledge. Check those first before you think about China. Once you check all those boxes and you think, China is an interesting market, then the next step is to find out how you develop. You partner, whether you want to do your own business or whatever. I mean, that's the second story. But first thing first, there are things to check.
Great. That's some really great concluding advice from our panel. It was partner, have local partners is extremely important. You've got to be able to move fast, be agile. Don't take 6 months to make a decision that everyone else is making in a couple days. It moves extremely fast in China. There was don't come to China unless you truly have something unique to offer. It's a highly competitive market, and make sure your service actually makes sense in China, as in the case of insurance. So that's some great concluding advice. Thank you so much to our panelists. Please give them a hand.